Welcome back, everybody. This is part 3 of Keep My Commandments. I pray that you guys have been learning thus far and you are being increased in knowledge, wisdom, and understanding. Let us give all praise, honor, and glory for the reason why we're here, to our Father, Abba Yahweh, and to our King Yahweh Shai. I thank you guys for joining me on the channel today, joining me in this study. And I'm hoping and I'm praying that I can reach one with this lesson, Lord willing. So we are picking up today in Matthew chapter 12. You see the subject matter, Sabbath questions. We're going to begin at verse 1. All right. At that time, Yahushua went on the Sabbath day. He went on the Sabbath day through the corn, and his disciples were an hungered and began to pluck the ears of corn and to eat. But when the Pharisees saw it, they said unto him, Behold, thy disciples do that which is not lawful to do upon the Sabbath day. Now, you see, it says they were hungry, and so they went through the corn and they began to pluck the ears of corn and to eat. Now, many people will, begin to immediately argue, that means wheat. Corn means wheat. And the reason why they will argue this is because, it's widely known that corn is indigenous to the Americas, right? There was no corn in the Middle East or in Africa or anything like that until more recently, right? So they want you to believe that everywhere you see corn in the Bible, it's actually talking about wheat. And they are half right and half wrong, because some places it does refer to wheat as corn, but not everywhere. And that's why you need discernment. Now, for those who understand wheat, you know that there is a process that wheat has to go through in order to be edible. So it doesn't make any sense whatsoever that his disciples were going through the cornfields and they were picking wheat and eating it unprocessed. Doesn't sound logical when you understand harvestry and, the processing that, the wheat has to go through in order to be used for our daily use, for our food purposes, our food preparation purposes. Okay. But anyway, that was just a sidebar. That has nothing to do with the lesson. I just went on that tangent because it's just something that vexes me. And the reason why it vexes other people and they stubbornly hold on to this notion is because if corn is indigenous to the Americas and the corn was spoken of in the Bible and they're eating corn and utilizing corn in this time, what is being said that's not being said about our understanding of the world, right? I'll leave that for you to ponder, right? So, but when the Pharisees saw it, verse 2, they said unto him, Behold, thy disciples do that which is not lawful to do upon the Sabbath day. But he said unto them, Have ye not read what David did when he was an hungered, and they that were with him? How he entered into the house of God and did eat the showbread, which was not lawful for him to eat, neither for them that were with him, but only for the priests? Or have ye not read in the law how that on the Sabbath days the priests in the temple profane the Sabbath and are blameless? But I say unto you that in this place is one greater than the temple. You see, when they were having a problem with what his disciples were doing, he didn't condemn his disciples. He didn't say that there was a problem with it. He justified it. He justified it, and he justified it with history, saying, what the law keepers have done and what David has done, and they weren't destroyed for doing it, right? But if ye had known what this meaneth, I will have mercy and not sacrifice, ye would not have condemned the guiltless. So he's saying that his disciples were guiltless. They weren't guilty. They weren't in trouble with God because of what they done. They were in trouble with men They violated what men think is acceptable behavior and not what God believes is acceptable behavior. God doesn't want his people to starve just because it's the seventh day of the week. But that is the foolishness of men, right? He doesn't want people to not be healed or to be left to die because it's the seventh day of the week. That's foolishness, right? He says, for the Son of Man is Lord, even of the Sabbath day. And again, I've been into it countless times about what that statement actually means. But see, you see here that though the 10 commandments are pushed and the keeping of the Sabbath day is one of the 10 commandments, there is an exception, which is the Sabbath day. The Most High God doesn't feel about the Sabbath day the way that men, Israelites, feel about the Sabbath day. He cares about all the other laws, all the other commandments being abided by, but he's not really being a stickler for the Sabbath day. Okay? He's not. And again, this is like blasphemous to speak of in the eyes of many, in the minds of many in the awakened community. But this is the truth. And this is what we were supposed to gather from the tales of what happened to Christ and with Christ and what he said out of his own mouth. The things that were written aforetime were written for our learning. Well, what were we supposed to learn from what we just read? What were we supposed to learn from what our King just said? Is that the Sabbath day is not a day to be worshiped. It is not something that the Most High God is being a stickler for. Why? It's because it is another one of those things that our people use to oppress each other. And again, his purpose was to remove the things out of the way that were causing us to be at odds with one another and with God. And the keeping of the Sabbath day was one of those things. And to show you that he was not being a stickler for the Sabbath day, what did he do? He allowed our enemies to take us captive, and he allowed them to change the Sabbath day from the seventh day to the first day. He allowed them to make these changes as an illustration of the fact that he was not pushing the Sabbath day on us the way we believe. Because if he was, he would not have allowed our enemies to change the Sabbath day. Remember, all things are from the Most High God. Man's goings are of the Lord. How can a man then understand his own way? The Most High God is his will being done, and it was his will for the Sabbath day to be changed by these people. Why? Because he's showing us something. Those of us who know that the Most High God is responsible for all things, those of us who give him credit for all things, he knows that we would look at these kind of things, the things that was allowed to happen, and we would say, okay, well, this was God. This is what God wanted. If God wanted us to keep the Sabbath day, he wouldn't have allowed them to change it. If God wanted us to keep the Sabbath day, he wouldn't have got rid of the priesthood and the temple. If he wanted us to keep the Sabbath day, he wouldn't have removed our knowledge of self. He wouldn't have taken from us the knowledge of our traditions through our enemies. He would have made sure, he would have ensured that we would have been able to keep the Sabbath day if that's what he really wanted. But he did not. And we're supposed to know what God wanted about the things that he's done. But many do not, because they do not know God. So they err in their ways, in their understanding, right? Because they don't understand God, they don't understand his judgments. They don't understand his laws. They don't understand his commandments. They don't understand his desires. They don't know his mind. They don't know his heart, because they don't know him. Matthew chapter 5. And again, I would suggest that everyone read all of Matthew, but definitely read Matthew chapter 5 through 7. Okay? Definitely. And then read all of it, all of Matthew. Read all of the book of John. It'll help you get to understand Christ and the Father better and the commandments that he's been a stickler for. All right? He says, keep my commandments. Well, you need to read what he had to say about the commandments in order to know how to do that. Otherwise, how do you know if you're pleasing him or not? Matthew chapter 5, verse 18. For verily I say unto you, till heaven and earth pass, one jot or one tittle shall in no wise pass from the law till all be fulfilled. And the reason why I'm getting this is for a couple reasons. One is for what comes next. But in this verse in particular, this is a heavily quoted verse in the awakened Israelite community, especially by those who push the law of Moses for them to justify and to use to condemn those who are not sticking to the law of Moses. They try to tell you, well, see, it says that one jot or one tittle shall in no wise pass from the law. Yeah, but they don't read the rest. Till all be fulfilled. You see, there is a caveat. There is an expiration date put on the laws of Moses. There is a expiration date put on, things passing from the law. Till all be fulfilled. Well, all what be fulfilled? Well, the things that were written of Christ to fulfill, the things in the Old Testament, right? Whosoever therefore, and we're going to come back and touch on that again, so keep that in mind. Whosoever therefore shall break one of these commandments and shall teach men so, he shall be called the least in the kingdom of heaven. But whosoever shall do and teach them, the same shall be called great in the kingdom of heaven. And listen to the wording. Whosoever therefore shall break one of these least commandments. Why does he say that? It's because he's getting ready to go into the commandments. He's getting ready to clarify what he wants people to abide by. And so he's telling you, okay, now I'm about to give you, a rundown of what I want you to do and the commandments that I want you to follow and so forth. And anybody that breaks one of these least commandments and shall teach men so, he shall be called the least in the kingdom of heaven. Okay? For I say unto you that except your righteousness shall exceed the righteousness of the scribes and the Pharisees, ye shall in no case enter in the kingdom of heaven. What did he say? If your righteousness doesn't exceed the righteousness of the scribes and Pharisees, you shall in no case enter into the kingdom of heaven. And this is crucial for those of my brethren to understand, because the righteousness of the Pharisees and the scribes was the law of Moses. The law of Moses is the thing, their instrument of righteousness. It was their barometer of their righteousness. He says your righteousness must exceed the righteousness of the scribes and Pharisees, meaning your works of the law of Moses. Your righteousness has to exceed the law of Moses, or you will in no case enter into the kingdom of heaven. This is again our king speaking against the law of Moses. Again. Okay. Let's go to John chapter 19. Keeping in mind verse 18 here. Let's get it again. For verily I say unto you, till heaven and earth pass, one jot or one tittle shall in no wise pass from the law, till all be fulfilled. You see that? So he's not saying that one jot or one tittle would never pass from the law. He just told you that it wouldn't happen until all be fulfilled. So he's telling you that it's going to happen, and he's telling you when. Now let's get a little bit more on the when. All right. Let's get John chapter 19. Verse 30. Yahushua is on the Christ. He's on the Christ. He's on the cross. When Yahushua therefore had received the vinegar, he said, it is finished. And he bowed his head and he gave up the ghost. It is finished. What's another way to say that? It is fulfilled. What is finished? What is fulfilled? His mission, right, was to come and die for his people, to save us from the transgressions that were under the law, to save us from the law of Moses. One jot or one tittle shall not pass from the law until all be fulfilled. That is why when he said, it is finished, bowed his head, gave up the ghost. And then what happened? The temple, the veil was rent. The veil of the temple was rent. It was torn. It was destroyed, signifying and symbolizing the fact that that was no longer the way to righteousness, no longer the way in which the Most High God wanted his people to come to him or to come by righteousness, signifying the fact that jots and tittles were now removed from the law, right? Because if jots and tittles have not been removed from the law, if all had not been fulfilled, then that means even the sacrificial part of the law is still in effect, right? Right? If you're going to say that I'm wrong, that when he says until all be fulfilled, that it was fulfilled and that this is what he meant here. If you're going to say that I'm wrong about this, you're also saying that the law of sacrifice is still in effect. Because if this is not what happened at this point, then it shouldn't be not one jot or one tittle removed from the law. And the sacrificial part of the law would be jots and tittles. If indeed the sacrificial part of the law is removed, which it was, but not only, but if it was, then that means jots and tittles were removed, right? That means all were fulfilled. So you can argue that all was not fulfilled, but also argue that sacrificial law was removed. That's jots and tittles, man. You're arguing foolishness, and I'm passionate like this is because I'm arguing against points that I've heard made. I'm not just arguing, you know what I'm saying, and speaking against a hypothetical position. No, I'm speaking against a position that I see firmly held on to by the ignorant among us. All right? And I don't mean ignorant in a derogatory fashion. I mean ignorant as in unknowledgeable on the subject. People who are not knowledgeable on a particular subject. They are not knowledgeable on this subject, so they are in ignorance. All right? Let's get John chapter 5. I think I want, yeah, John chapter 5, verse 30. I can of mine own self do nothing. As I hear, I judge, and my judgment is just, because I seek not mine own will, but the will of the Father, which hath sent me. Right? And so I'm getting this for those people who would argue against Christ, because there are Old Testament onlys among us. They don't believe in Christ. They don't, you know, because they say, oh, he's still in the glory from the Father, or that, you know, he spoke against things that the Father instituted, because they believe that everywhere they see Lord in the Old Testament, that is it's the Father, but sometimes it's Christ, only they don't know it. So they think Christ is replacing the Father when Christ has been here the whole time. He didn't just pop up in the New Testament, right? But he tells you he didn't come to do his own will. He came to do the will of the Father. So he constantly gave reverence to the Father. He says, why callest thou me good? There's only one good, and that's the Father which is in heaven. So never did Christ try to replace the Father, supplant the Father, remove the Father off of his throne, or take away from the Father's glory. That never happened. That is the ideology of men. And it is the same ideology of the Pharisees that caused them to persecute Christ. And that same spirit is in the earth and in the awakened Israelite community to this day. That's why I'm speaking against it. All right? I'm not just saying anything for no reason. There is absolutely a reason for everything that I'm speaking about, for, and against in this series, okay? Let's get Matthew chapter 6, verse 38. For I came down from heaven, not to do mine own will, but the will of him that sent me. Again, just want to reiterate this and hammer this home for the people, you know, who are Christ deniers. And one of the reasons they use to deny Christ is they try to say that, you know, the idea of Christ and Christ's existence takes away from the glory of God. And that, you know, and they don't really read the New Testament for themselves. They just discount it, or they read it and they don't understand what they're reading. So they try to make it seem as if Christ was trying to supplant the Father, that Christ never gave reverence to the Father, that he never showed reverence to the Father, that he never said the Father was above him. They want to make it seem as if Christ is not to be believed or believed in, because no way would God, our Father, allow any other entity to come along and take away from his glory. Again, they don't understand the Father, and they don't understand Christ. They don't understand the Old Testament, and they don't understand the New. All right? That's why they have these arguments. Matthew chapter 26, verse 39. And he went a little further and fell on his face and prayed, saying, "O my Father, if it be possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as thou wilt." You see that? He's praying to the Father because he is not on the same level as the Father. He has not replaced the Father. The Father is not done away with because he came, which is also a Christian belief, which is also the other side of why I'm bringing this up. All right, it is a Christian fallacy as well. Okay, and so he says, "If it be possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as thou wilt." All right. It is all about the will of the Father. He came to do the will of the Father. And the will of the Father was to have the law of Moses removed and to have the Ten Commandments emphasized unto us. This is what Christ came to do. This was the will of the Father for his people, to depart from the law of Moses and to cling to the Ten Commandments. All right. The commandments of Christ. The commandments that Christ spoke of were the commandments of the Father. He was pushing the commandments of our Father unto us, not his own. All right, this is important to understand. So let's go back to John. We'll go to John chapter 4. We are going to get verse 34. Yahushua saith unto them, "My meat is to do the will of him that sent me and to finish his work." Remember on the cross, he says, "It is finished." He removed those jots and tittles from the law. All was fulfilled on the cross, right? It is my meat to do the will of him that sent me and to finish his work. Again, giving reverence to our Father, the Most High God, not trying to supplant him or steal his glory. He constantly pointed people back to the Father, as I constantly try to point people back to my head, back to Christ, who, when I send you to him, he's going to send you to the Father. Imagine that. Let's get Hebrews chapter 10, verse 7. Then said I, "Lo, I come in the volume of the book. It is written of me to do thy will, O God." Christ is telling you that he is spoken of, written of, and speaking and acting and present all throughout the book. Yes, that includes the Old Testament. He was present even though you didn't see him, even though you couldn't see him, even though you couldn't hear his voice because you were not his sheep. So you could not hear his voice. You could not see. You were under the blindness, the gross darkness that covered the people. Right? I don't want you to be ignorant of the fact that blindness in part has happened unto Israel until the times of the Gentiles become in. Right? This is what's going on. This is why many people can't see. And so they cling to the law of Moses. They cling to 613 laws because they just can't see for the life of them the truth that is in God and the simplicity that is in him trying to bring us back to him. He gave us an easy path. He wanted us to have an easy path back to him, not to be pulled away from him with 613 laws. Okay? He didn't want us to awaken and then be overwhelmed with 613 laws. He knew that would make it impossible or near impossible and difficult for the people to come back to him and to cling to him the way he wanted to, because it's happened already. He is wise enough and he knows history. Our history has shown what happens to us under the law, that it causes us to stray from him. Hebrews chapter 9, verse 1, the old and the new. Then verily, the first covenant had also ordinances of divine service and a worldly sanctuary. For there was a tabernacle made, the first wherein was the candlestick, and the table, and the showbread, which is called the sanctuary. And after the second veil, the tabernacle, which is called the holiest of all, which had the golden censer and the ark of the covenant overlaid round about with gold, wherein was the golden pot that had manna, and Aaron's rod that budded, and the tables of the covenant, and over it the cherubims of glory, shadowing the mercy seat, of which we cannot now speak particularly. Now, when these things were thus ordained, the priests went always into the first tabernacle, accomplishing the service of God. But into the second went the high priest alone, once every year, not without blood, which he offered for himself and for the errors of the people. So, the Holy Spirit, this signifying that the way into the holiest of all was not yet made manifest, while as the first tabernacle was yet standing, which was a figure for the time then present, in which were offered both gifts and sacrifices that could not make him that did the service perfect, as pertaining to the conscience, which stood only in meats and drinks and diverse washings and cardinal ordinances imposed on them until the time of Reformation. The time of Reformation came with Christ, right? Which stood only in meats and drinks and diverse washings and cardinal ordinances. These were the laws, statutes, and commandments. Again, I say that, but not the commandments. It's the laws and statutes you hear the Israelites talking about when they use the term laws, statutes, and commandments. They're all reading from the same playbook, because, again, it's natural, right? Because you begin to, your teachers are considered like trees, and the students of the teacher are considered fruit. That's why it says you know them by their fruit, right? So if the tree is wicked by the fruit that it produces, right? Well, look at the different people you see proclaiming the fact that the laws, statutes, and commandments are in effect. They are showing you which tree they come from, who their teachers are, and who they have learned from. And so you know what they know if you know what their teachers taught. And so you know that they believe that the law is still in effect, but that also, Christ, is also our king. So these are the fence straddlers that I'm speaking to in particular right now. Okay, verse 11. But Christ, being come in high priest of good things to come, by a greater and a more perfect tabernacle, not made with hands, that is to say, not of this building, neither by the blood of goats and calves, but by his own blood he entered in once into the holy place, having obtained eternal redemption for us. For if the blood of bulls and of goats and of the ashes of an heifer, sprinkling the unclean, sanctifieth to the purifying of the flesh, how much more shall the blood of Christ, who through the eternal Spirit offered himself without spot to God, purge your conscience from dead works to serve the living God? And for this cause, he is the mediator of the New Testament, that by means of death, listen, for the redemption of the transgressions that were under the first testament, they which are called might receive the promise of eternal inheritance. So two things you see here is that Christ died to redeem the people who transgressed under the first covenant. That's first for you Christians. And then secondly, for the Israelite community, those of you who cling to the law of Moses, you see, the scriptures are telling you that he died to redeem us for the transgressions that were under the first testament. The sacrificial law wasn't the transgressions that were under the first testament. It is what we did after, or we did because of the transgressions. Okay? You get that? The sacrificial law was not the transgression. The sacrificial law was what we did as a result of the transgressions. And so he came to put away the things that we did under the law that made us transgressors. And because he did away with those things, we no longer needed the law of sacrifice, because the things that caused us to need the law of sacrifice was taken out of the way. That's why the sacrificial law was removed, because it was no longer needed. Christ's death made the law no longer necessary, because he redeemed us from the transgressions that were under the first testament. Okay? All right. Go to Hebrews chapter 7, verse 11. If therefore perfection were by the Levitical priesthood, for under it the people received the law, what further need was there that another priest should rise after the order of Melchizedek, and not be called after the order of Aaron? For the priesthood being changed, there is made of necessity a change also of the law. You hear that? Because the priesthood, which was changed from the Levitical priest to Christ, there became a change of the law. It's like when you work for a certain, you work for a company, right? And then that company gets bought out. What happens a lot of the time is the company that now has bought out the other company, they will either bring in people that know their way of things and will do things the way they want them to be done, or they will make changes to the old way things were done, because under the new management, we got new rules, right? We got a new way of doing things. Well, it's the same thing with Christ. When he came in and replaced the Levitical priesthood, he made changes to the laws that were being pushed and enforced by the Levitical priesthood. All right? Perfection did not come by the law. That's why it was taken out of the way. Got it? All right. Now, let's go to Galatians chapter 4. And last, this is the last verse in this study. We are done here after this. So Galatians chapter 4, verse 21 and final. This is my question to those who love the law of Moses, who love the 613 laws so much. Listen, I have the same question as Paul. Tell me, ye that desire to be under the law, do ye not hear the law? And this is a great question. It's because if you hear the law, if you read it in its entirety, you know that it's oppressive. It is an oppressive system, right? And the same people who believe the laws of this land are oppressive, and they know that it is the works of God and the desire of God to destroy this oppressive system. If it is the habit of God to destroy oppressive systems, why would it be beyond reason that he would remove the law of Moses, which was an oppressive system to the Israelites? Why wouldn't I stand to reason? And if you have read all 613 laws, why would you still want to be under the law? Why would you not be thankful and grateful that Christ came to save us from not having to be accountable to those 613 laws? Because if you read them, you would know that you violated those laws, many of those laws at some point, and that you continue to violate some of those laws currently. You do not uphold the 613 laws of Moses. You know you don't. If you read them, you know that you don't uphold them. You know that you don't abide by them. So why would you want to be judged by laws that you know you don't and can't keep? That's crazy. And so you sound crazy to those of us who are logically thinking people. Why would anybody of right mind, of sound mind and body, why would anybody in their right mind want to cling to the law of Moses when you don't and you can't? That is astounding. With that said, I pray that you guys were edified by this. Let us give all praise, all honor, and all of the glory to our beloved Father Yahweh and to our blessed King Hamashiach Yahweh Shai. Grace, peace, and blessings to the saints. And I pray that you guys are all edified by this. You Gentiles that are listening, I pray that you're learning, you're receiving discernment and the ability to understand these things as well, because there is an application of this for you, right? If you are to cleave to Israel, you have to abide by the same rules that we're under, which means you have to follow the commandments as well. You have to understand the commandments of our God, of our King, if you want to cleave unto us and not be destroyed. So again, if you were edified, pay it forward. Be a blessing to others. Each one, reach one. Until next time, Lord willing, stay blessed out there, everybody. Shalom.